So in times of crisis, strong leadership plays an important role in leading the people through difficult times. And I'm sure you're very well aware of that fact. And we see nations and government leaders like the presidents addressing the nation in times of great distress, like to comfort the people in pain, but also to assure the people with hope and strength. I remember when 9/11 happened, I was watching the news. Everybody was stuck to the TV, watching news 24/7. The president addressed the nation to comfort, but also to assure of the hope that we have as a nation together. But in the smaller scale too, when you look at sports teams, coaches play a big role, and teams pay big money to bring in good coaches. And when the team doesn't do well, it is usually the coach that steps down because of the responsibility as a leader. So a single leader can either bring tremendous amount of good to the people, comfort and strength to the people, but also at the same time, a tremendous amount of harm could be brought because of a single leader. And we all know the importance of a leadership. And during Peter's time in today's letter, many churches were suffering because of their faith. Many people were hurting because of their faith. If you were not hurting, certainly the people that you knew, certainly people that you loved were hurting. And as a result of persecution, many Christians had to be dispersed throughout the Mediterranean area and into parts of Asia and beyond. And Peter is trying to encourage the church with this letter. And he, in this concluding portion of the letter, he is becoming very practical in ways to encourage not just a single Christian who is reading the letter, but a collective people of God, namely the church of God. And he is giving ways to encourage what could be a very discouraged church at that time because of suffering. And what is Peter's practical way to encourage them? Peter turns to the leaders of the church. Peter turns to the leaders of the church and he admonishes them, the leaders of the church, to shepherd the flock of God. To shepherd the flock of God. Care for God's people. We're no longer living in an agricultural society, but back then everybody understood what shepherding the flock means. A shepherd will provide two main things. One is provision. You provide the food. But the other is protection. You protect the flock. So it is a dual task that a shepherd must take on. And Peter is admonishing the church leaders. Whatever the church that he is overseeing is receiving this letter, he is admonishing every leader in the church to shepherd and care for the flock of God because they are discouraged, because they could be easily disheartened because of the suffering that they're receiving. And he is encouraging them to exercise the leadership that God has given them to care for God's elect sojourners. So in essence, the person who should benefit the most from today's passage is me. Right? It's me, because I am a pastor here in this church, and I have assumed a role among many leaders here in the church to shepherd the flock of God. And today's passage is primarily for the elders of the church. The Greek term for elders is presbyteros, meaning elders, and this is where our Presbyterian denomination name comes from. Right? So if you wonder where the name Presbyterian came from, it's such a big word that we don't know where it came from. It comes from the Greek word elder. And our denomination is governed by a group of elders primarily, but also with the rest of the congregation in a very Republican type of governing, where everyone gets to vote in deciding certain matters. But it is mainly the elders who are leading the church, and that is the term presbyteros. Like the pastors, so they're teaching elders, like the pastors like myself, but they're also ruling and governing elders, overseeing the church business and church running of the church. You need administrative elders as well. But I believe the principle found in this passage, although the main audience is for the elders of the church, the principle that is found in this passage is not only applicable for the governing and the teaching elders, but it is also applicable to any leaders in the church. Any leaders in the church. Anyone who has assumed the role of leading anyone in any capacity in the church. So think about that for a moment. See if you kind of fall in that category. If you're leading the congregation in singing, you are a leader in the church. And if you're leading in teaching, if you're leading a small group, if you're leading in planning, if you're leading in outreach, if you're leading in inreach and caring for the church members, if you're leading in welcoming, if you're leading in fellowship, if you're leading in potlucks, if you're leading as mentors, or simply being a big brother or big sister to a younger congregation, you are leading, and this passage is for you, including many of our future leaders as well. And this principle applies not only to the leaders in the church, but also anyone who leads in any areas in life if you're a Christian, right? Beyond the walls of this church. God is calling you to lead in a way that shines God's glory and heals God's people in this dark and depraved generation. So if you're assuming any kind of leadership role, if you're a mom, you're a leader. If you're an older brother, you're a leader. If you're an older brother to any of your friends, or if you assume any kind of leadership, I pray that the principle that is found in this passage not only blesses you, but encourages you to do it in a way that God is honored. And the question this passage begs to be answered is this: how should we then lead as God-fearing people? How should we then lead in the proper ways as God's people? Especially in times of crisis, when there is times of pain, especially when this letter was written. It was specifically in those settings. When people are in need of your help, how can we lead in a way that glorifies God, that brings God honor, and also that edifies and that builds up the church and his people? So I want to look at 3 levels today. So the first level is the method. So we're going to go deeper and deeper. We're going to dig deep in 3 levels. One is the method. We're going to look at the method as to how we can do that. And then we're going to look at the principle that is foundational over that. And then the cause. What causes all of this? So first, the method. Let's look at the method. So Peter gives pointers, very practical pointers, in 2 different directions of a leader. One is internally. He is giving pointers, practical pointers, as regards to your own self. Okay, so if you're assuming any kind of leadership, examine yourselves internally. And then what do you think the second point will be? He gives practical pointers to externally. Externally, how with regards to you dealing with other people. Okay, so let's look at internal exhortation, internal pointers that Peter gives us as to how the method in leading. Look with me in verse 2. Well, 1 and 2. Let me read to you. So I exhort the elders among you, as a fellow elder and a witness of sufferings of Christ, as well as partaker in the glory that is going to be revealed. This is the admonition that he gives, and that is, shepherd the flock of God. that is among you. Exercise oversight. Okay? So be a good ruling elder. Shepherd them by exercising oversight over all the sheep. And one is not under compulsion, but willingly, as God would have you. So first is that, he is encouraging internally, all right, I want you to exercise oversight, but do that not under compulsion, but do that willingly as God would have you. Do that with a willing heart. So he is calling all the leaders to examine your heart, whether you're doing this out of a willing heart versus doing it under compulsion. Compulsion means what? Like you are told to do or that you are forced to do. With no arms twisted, right? Peter is encouraging all elders to exercise oversight and be shepherds over the flock that God has given you with a willing spirit that is joyful, that is filled with the Spirit of God. But not only that, what else does he say? He says, exercise oversight not for shameful gain, but do so eagerly. Don't do it for any shameful gain. Okay? So the two things that he is calling us to check internally is a test that not many people can see. Right? Other people usually cannot test you whether you are doing it out of compulsion or whether you're doing it out of your own selfish gain. But this is something that you have to check internally with the Lord constantly. Without this check, we would become that horrible leader that no one wants to follow, right? And we're going to talk about that in a minute. But this is a test for yourself because it is not easily detected by others, but you must examine your own heart daily in a way that when you're ministering, you're not doing it out of compulsion. You're not doing it out of force, but also at the same time, you're not serving, you're not exercising oversight to gain anything out of your service, out of your leadership. And the gain here could be monetary gain, right? Or it could be physical gain, something that you do so that you advance yourself in materials. But oftentimes within the church, it's hard to find those. Well, okay, I'll talk about that in a minute too. But oftentimes it is the gains of your own personal reputation, or it could be your own righteousness. It could be your own fame, right? So how many times have you read stories? How many times have you heard people where they are cheating people or taking advantage of people's needs to advance themselves monetarily? Right? We've seen terrible leaders like that, especially in the church. It really enrages me, but also at the same time, it breaks my heart because they really capitalize on the desperate state and conditions of the people, right? And whether they do it willingly or whether they do it unwillingly, they advance themselves monetarily, materialistically, or even just in your personal recognition. There are a lot of celebrity pastors who are drawing more attention than Jesus Christ to themselves, right? They are the banner that they hang up front rather than the Jesus that they preach. It is sad to see many. So it is important that any leaders, especially the ruling and teaching elders, including myself, we have to examine ourselves constantly to see whether we're doing this out of compulsion or whether we're doing this for any kind of, what does it say? Dirty gain, shameful gain. There's an external check too. Externally, verse 3 says, not domineering over those in your charge, but being examples to the flock. So when you're exercising oversight, You must not exercise in a way that is domineering over people, where you are just top-down authority that you are just laying down your authority and breaking the wills of people in a way that you're leading in such domineering way. And Peter says, don't do it that way, but rather, how? Serve them by being an example to the flock. And Peter gives instructions to both internal check and external check. And Peter gives ways not to pastor or lead the church. He goes in details how not to do it. Because if you're not careful, we could become a leader that is terrible and that no one would follow. Or they're causing more hurt. So can you imagine a leader who is leading out of compulsion, who has no business in leading, but they're doing it just because they have to, or just because they're told to? That's a terrible leader to follow, right? There's no passion, there's no goal, there's no vision in it. But what about those people who constantly want something out of it? Right? They're constantly trying to advance themselves through shameful gains, cutting corners or cheating here and there to advance themselves as a leader. But what about those who are domineering over? Those are terrible leaders that we shouldn't have in the church. But let's dig a little bit deeper. So those are pretty obvious. It's easy. If you read it, you can understand. Yes, those are ways that we shouldn't do it. But let's dig a little bit deeper. But how then can a leader lead in a godly way? How can a leader then not lead out of compulsion, not lead out of shameful gain, or not lead in a domineering manner? How can we do that? What is the overarching principle that governs the characteristics of a Christ-like leader? Well, if you have read with me in the first 4 verses, there's a common theme that kind of pops up if you read over and over. And this theme is also consistent through the next several messages as well. In the whole chapter 5, and the theme is humility. So this is the principle. If you're humble in God, all the methods come very, very easy. Right? You don't even have to think about the method if you hold on to this principle that Peter has given us. So first is humility. A Christ-like leader must be humble. So look at Peter's language here. So Peter is admonishing the church leaders, but we see incredible humility on Peter's part in the vocabulary and the language that he uses. If anyone has power over any church at that time, it's Peter. Okay? So first of all, if you read chapter 1, verse 1, he identifies himself as the apostle. And apostle we use sparingly because we want to dedicate the term apostle to the disciple of Jesus Christ, the 12 disciples that walk with Jesus Christ, or at least the ones who has seen Jesus or has heard directly, has received direct teaching of Jesus Christ. So that's the apostle. And you know the 12 disciples, and out of the 12, Peter was definitely the one who was the most passionate, who was the most closest to Jesus Christ. And not only that, during this time, Peter was a leader in the church in Jerusalem. Right? The very first church that started in Jerusalem, in the upper room in Jerusalem, Peter became the leader of the church, and he is now writing this letter as a leader of all churches in the world to a dispersed church all around the area. So he is writing with a lot of authority when you think about it. This man is pastor's pastor, or should I say pastor's pastor even. Like, he is up there. And yet, if you look at his language, he doesn't say, I command the elders among you. But instead, what word does he use? I exhort you. Exhorting means strongly encouraging or strongly urging. He could easily just have said, all right, with the authority that I have over you, I was that disciple who was closest to Jesus. You know it all, right? And I was the man. I was that guy, but I'm not going to command you even though I can. Because why? We read it here. He doesn't want anyone to lead out of compulsion. If you command people, they may do the task that they're commanded, but oftentimes if you're commanded to do something, you would do it in compulsion. But because he doesn't want any leaders to serve out of any sense of compulsion or any sense of force, he is not forcing any of them. He is not commanding them, but instead he is exhorting them. And in other translations, NIV renders it this way: I appeal to you. He is appealing with the elders of the church. He is appealing to them, exhorting them. And the Greek word here is parakaleo. Kaleo is the word to call, calling, but para means you're calling by your side, right? So you're calling with them on their side. You're inviting them. You're not calling from somewhere far or somewhere above, but you're as a peer, as a fellow worker, you're inviting them into, you're invoking them, you're calling alongside them to join with you in shepherding the flock of God. And how else does he address himself? He addresses himself as a fellow elder. A fellow elder. What is he doing here right now? He is lowering himself, although he does have that official rank over any of the church and over any of the church elders and church members. He is lowering himself and he is placing himself alongside. He is identifying himself as an equal to another elder of the church. When you think about it, this is remarkable. This is a remarkable sense of humility that Peter is exercising here. The language suggests to us the very heart of Peter. This man was different when he was with Jesus. And I'm going to talk about that in a minute here. But he says, I exhort you. I exhort the elders that are among you. And who is you? He is addressing the whole church. So he is telling the church how their pastors and how their elders should behave. And he is doing that as a fellow elder. This is incredible humility. When force is used, when authority is pressed upon, the end result is usually compulsion. But when exhorted, you will serve willingly and eagerly. And this is still something that I'm really learning to master at home. Don't ask my children how I am as a father at home. Please don't. But it is so difficult. It is a difficult thing to do when you actually have that authority, not to exercise it in a way that is domineering. Right? And yet to display that authority in such grace and love above any sense of force, it is almost impossible. And I'll tell you, when you're a parent, it is hard to do so. Because you do have that authority over your children, and yet Peter is encouraging all leaders, especially church leaders, to not do it out of compulsion, not do it to gain any shameful things, nor to be domineering over anyone that you are overseeing. But here Peter identifies himself not as someone above, but as someone equal, a fellow elder. And this is incredible because he is urging the church while he is doing it. So he is doing what he's preaching. He is walking what he's talking. Do you follow me? He is encouraging the leaders not to be that, and he is not that leader also at the same time. And that is why Peter is such a great leader. And the second principle is this. Not only this was a man of humility, and he is encouraging all leaders to be a man and woman of humility, this leader was focused on Jesus. His eyes were fixated on who Jesus was and what he was like. So how does he identify himself as? Not only as a fellow elder, if you read verse 1 once again, he says, I am a witness of the sufferings of Christ, as well as a partaker in the glory that is going to be revealed. So he identifies as a witness and a partaker, both in relation to Jesus Christ. I'm a witness of the suffering of Jesus Christ. Was Peter a witness of the suffering of Jesus Christ? Oh yeah, he was. He was there when he was captured. He was there when everybody betrayed him, himself included. He betrayed Jesus. And he was there when he was beat. Peter was there when Jesus was put on several trials. And he was there when Jesus was carrying that cross by himself without anyone to help. And he was actually there when Jesus was being nailed to the cross, pouring out all of his blood, all of his bodily fluids. And he was there when spears pierced his sides and the thorn crowns pierced his head. And he was there, witnessed the sufferings of Jesus Christ when Jesus died on the cross. He saw it all. He was there. He was actually a partaker, not only of the glory, but also of the suffering. He instigated, he almost afflicted Jesus because he betrayed, but not only betrayed, he cursed Jesus 3 times, saying, I don't know that man. I had no relation with that man. He is a witness of that suffering. But because he witnessed that suffering, he also knows that he will partake in the glory that is to come. And it is the same mindset not only Peter had. So this principle, my brothers and sisters, is not only applied to Peter, but also Paul preaches the same message. The same principle is preached when you read 1 Corinthians chapter 2. This is what Paul says, 1 Corinthians chapter 2, verses 1 through 5. Let's read together in one voice. Let's read. And I, when I came to you, brothers, did not come proclaiming to you the testimony of God with lofty speech or wisdom, for I decided to know nothing among you except Jesus Christ and him crucified. And I was with you in weakness and in fear and much trembling. And my speech and my message were not in plausible words of wisdom, but in demonstration of the Spirit and of power, so that your faith might not rest in the wisdom of men, but in the power of God. What did he say? I decided to know nothing among you except Jesus Christ crucified. So Paul also was fixated on the suffering of Jesus Christ. And guess what happens if you fix your eyes on Jesus? Humility, the other principle, just follows. Look at the last verse there, verse 5. He says, so that your faith would not rest in you, but in the power of God. Right? So he doesn't take any glory because there's no wisdom in him, but all glory goes to God when you can fix your eyes and fix all of your attention to the suffering Savior of Jesus Christ. But not only that, because he was sure of that suffering, he also witnessed the glory of Jesus Christ. He identified as a partaker in the glory that is going to be revealed. And Peter saw the glory of God at the Mount of Transfiguration, but also in the resurrected Jesus Christ. He saw the power and the glory of Jesus in the resurrection. And then not only that, what else is he seeing constantly? Read with me verse 4 of 1 Peter 5. Verse 4 says this, and when the chief shepherd appears, you will receive the unfading crown of glory. So Peter, although he was a leader, he is fixed on the greater shepherd, the chief shepherd that is to come. Do you follow me? He was leading the church. He was leading many churches, but he has never left his sights of Jesus. He was a witness to the suffering of Jesus Christ, partaker of the glory that is to come, and he is long waiting for the chief shepherd to come. Once again, what happens if you fix your eyes on Jesus? Humility follows. And listen to Peter's words. He says, when a chief shepherd comes. So how is he seeing himself as? He's seeing himself as not the chief shepherd. He is not the chief shepherd. He is considering Jesus Christ as the chief shepherd, and he's considering himself as a smaller, a minor shepherd. There's so much humility that follows when you can fix your eyes on Jesus Christ. I like to consider myself not as the shepherd, obviously, because chief shepherd is Jesus Christ, but I like to see myself as a sheepdog that a shepherd loves to have by him, right? And that runs like crazy around the sheep to gather the sheep so that the sheep are pointed to the chief shepherd. That ought to be our role. When you are filled with Jesus Christ, humility just follows, and you give glory by saying, God, you are the chief shepherd and not me. But let's go one step further very quickly. Turn your Bible to John 21. Gospel of John 21. This is the cause. How is this all possible? Peter was such a brute, if you know him. He was a very impulsive man. He was very passionate, but he was also very passionate in denying Jesus. But how was this man who was so unworthy has become such a great leader in the church? This man turned around because none other than the love of Jesus Christ. Look at top of chapter 21 of Gospel of John. So this is after the resurrection of Jesus Christ. The resurrection happened in chapter 20, and they all are saying to themselves, Simon Peter said in verse 3, I am going fishing. When they said to him, we will go with you. And they went out and got into the boat, but that night they caught nothing. Why do you think they went fishing after the resurrection of Jesus Christ? I mean, shouldn't the resurrection of Jesus Christ change their lives forever? I mean, probably because he was so guilt-driven because of what he has done to Jesus Christ, right? Even though he's happy that Jesus rose again, he denied Jesus so blatantly, cursing him. And he says, he probably feels that I can no longer follow you, Lord. So I'm just going to return to my own task. That's how I see this passage. A man that is discouraged, a man that is incapable of serving the Lord faithfully because of the wrong that he has done in the past. But how does Jesus restore him? Read with me in verse 15. Let's read together verse 15 through 19. Let's read together. When they had finished breakfast, Jesus said to Simon Peter, Simon, son of John, do you love me more than these? He said to him, Yes, Lord, you know that I love you. He said to him, Feed my lambs. He said to him a second time, Simon, son of John, do you love me? He said to him, Yes, Lord, you know that I love you. He said to him, Tend my sheep. He said to him the third time, Simon, son of John, do you love me? Peter was grieved because he said to him the third time, Do you love me? And he said to him, Lord, you know everything, and you know that I love you. Jesus said to him, Feed my sheep. Truly, truly, I say to you, when you were young, you used to dress yourself and walk wherever you wanted. But when you're old, you will stretch out your hands, and another will dress you and carry you where you do not want to go. This he said to show by what kind of death he was to glorify God. And after saying this, he said to him, Follow me. To me, this is where he transformed. He was not a follower worthy of God's calling, to be the great shepherd, shepherding the flock of God. Because of his failure, he denied Jesus. He cursed Jesus over and over. 3 times he denied, and yet Jesus called him, sat with him one-on-one, encountered him personally and deeply and intimately. And he asked him, do you love me? He didn't ask, do you love me perfectly? He didn't ask, will you serve me well? All he is asking of you and I is the love that we have for God. Do you want to follow Jesus? And if you said yes to that, it doesn't matter how much you have failed Jesus. God says, take on that responsibility. Feed my sheep. Follow me. And that is the calling that God is giving you and I this morning. Will you follow him? Despite of your failures, despite of your shortcomings, will you follow him because he is calling you and I to serve him? And let's be faithful followers of Jesus Christ.